Hello and welcome to A Cup of Dhamma, where we explore Buddhist teachings over a coffee, tea, whatever you like. So if you'd like to join me, pour yourself something warm and let's chat. Today's topic came from a friend of mine. She'd spent some time reading into the Epstein files. And if you know what those contain, you'll understand why she felt she couldn't function properly for several days afterwards. She came to me with a question that I think a lot of us have asked in one form or another when we encounter something truly, deeply disturbing in the world, which is, why? How can this exist? How can people do things like this? She went looking for a Buddhist answer online and she couldn't really find one that, helped her. So this is for her and for anyone else who has ever stared at the worst of human behavior and needed something more than I want to say upfront, this is a long and complex topic, and I'm going to touch on several threads: the realms of existence, karma, Māra, the nature of evil, and the question of victims and perpetrators. Some of these, like karma, deserve their own video, which they will get. But today I want to try and give a full picture, even if in some parts it's kind of sketched out rather than painted in detail. So let's begin. The first thing to understand is that in Buddhism, there is no force of evil existing in the world for its own sake. No cosmic battle between good and evil. No inherently wicked souls. No people who were simply born bad. That framework, the one most of us absorbed from the culture around us, doesn't exist in the Buddhist picture. What does exist is something called Māra. Māra can perhaps be called the equivalent of the devil in Buddhism. He's sometimes described as a demon, and in the texts he behaves like one, but he's better understood as the embodiment of everything that keeps beings locked in the cycle of birth, becoming, decay, and death. His interest, if we can call it that, is to keep us distracted, blinded by sensual pleasures, and far away from anything that might lead us towards freedom. He's not evil for the sake of evil. He's the force of delusion and entrapment made personal. On the night of the Buddha's enlightenment, Māra pulled out all the stops. He sent armies to intimidate him. He sent his daughters to seduce him. He tried every angle. And the Buddha, completely unmoved, simply sat. There was nothing Māra could do in the face of that stillness. He had no purchase. Which brings us to something important. Your virtue, your inner goodness, your goodwill, your moral compass is something that no one can take from you. Only you can give it away. Only you can choose to act from ill will, hatred, greed. External forces, no matter how powerful or aggressive, can threaten your body, your reputation, your circumstances, but they cannot touch your mind unless you let them. The Buddha made this point with some extremity. He said, imagine robbers seizing you and sawing off your arms and legs. Even then, if you have developed the path sufficiently, you can meet that moment with goodwill towards the robbers. You can feel compassion for them. You might die, but your mind remains safe. That sounds almost impossible, right? And for most of us right now, it is. But it points to something real. The dangers that come from without are nothing compared to the dangers that arise from within. We are each responsible for our own inner world. No one else holds that responsibility for us. To understand why people do terrible things, it also helps to understand the Buddha's picture of the realms of existence. Within Kamaloka, the desire realm we talked about in a previous video, there are 6 realms. Hell realms, hungry ghost realms, the animal realm, the human realm, and the realm of the devas. These can be understood as actual realms in a cosmological sense, places the mind is reborn into based on its habitual inclinations, but they can also be understood as psychological states, modes of being that a mind inhabits right here, right now, in this life, in this body. And this is where it gets interesting. Just because someone has a human body does not mean their mind dwells in the human realm. To be genuinely human in the Buddhist sense requires something: morality, reflection, the capacity for restraint. These aren't automatic, they have to be cultivated. If a mind is predominantly occupied with territory, domination, reproduction, and attack, that's the animal realm. If it's consumed by endless insatiable craving that can never be satisfied, that is the hungry ghost realm. Hell is rage. Hell is hatred. Hell is the mind consumed by its own fire of aversion and fear. So look around. We see some of this, don't we? There are people walking around in human bodies whose minds are functionally in the animal realm, driven by instinct, appetite, dominance, and the compulsion to acquire and defend. There are hungry ghosts in boardrooms and on yachts. There are hell realms playing out in ordinary living rooms. So why do people end up this way? Why do genuinely harmful, destructive, sometimes monstrous people exist? The Buddhist answer is causes and conditions. Always causes and conditions. No one is born an agent of evil. No one arrives in the world already programmed to cause harm. What happens is this: a mind arrives already carrying accumulated karma from previous existences, tendencies, inclinations, the fruits of actions taken across many lifetimes. We come into this life with a garden already partly planted with seeds. And what childhood then does is determine which seeds get watered. Think about it. We arrive in the world as infants in something close to a state of open, unformed consciousness. We don't yet have a fixed identity. We don't have a name, a gender, a set of beliefs, a tribe. We just exist. And then immediately, relentlessly, we get conditioned, programmed by our parents, by the culture we're born into, by the language we learn, which in turn shapes the very categories through which we see reality, by what we are shown, what we are taught, what we experience as safe or dangerous, what gets rewarded and what gets punished. The first people who impact us completely are our parents. They are our first model of what human interaction looks like, what relationships are, what love is, what safety feels like, what we have to do to survive. What if those first models were violent, neglectful, absent? What if the only way a child learned to get their needs met was through manipulation, aggression, or shutting down entirely? What if they never once saw an adult set a moral limit? Someone saying clearly, I could do this, but I won't because it would cause harm. If the wrong seeds get watered, if what grows is fed by fear, violence, the absence of kindness, then they grow. If no one intervenes, if nothing changes, the stream of consciousness follows the path of least resistance, which is the path of its own conditioning. It just follows the craving blindly, from reward to reward, from one hit to the next, and things get darker and darker. And then at a certain point, something can happen that I describe, and I want to be clear that this is my own framing rather than a direct canonical teaching, though it maps onto the Buddhist description of hell and hungry ghost realms as an inversion of values. The mind becomes so conditioned towards harmful patterns that what should cause pain starts, in a deeply disturbed sense, to cause something like relief or even pleasure. Sadism in this reading is not original evil. It is a mind so damaged, so cut off from ordinary sources of connection and meaning, that it can only feel something through the suffering of others. This is a pitiable state. It really is. It doesn't make it less dangerous. It doesn't make the harm less real, but it is at its root a broken mind. A mind that needed help it never got. Ajahn Brahm works regularly with prisoners, people who have done genuinely terrible things. And he makes a point that is important and difficult in equal measure. No one is a murderer or a predator or whatever the worst thing they've done is. They have done these things, but that's not the entirety of what they are. There's something else there too, something that got buried, damaged, suppressed. There's potential there. There is underneath everything the same basic mind that we all share, that we all have. It just went in a very different direction. To understand how this darkening of the mind actually works mechanically, it helps to look at what the Buddha called the 3 unwholesome roots. These are greed, hatred, and delusion or ignorance. Everything unwholesome that a person thinks, says, or does, every harmful action of mind, speech, or body traces back to one or more of these 3 roots. They are the engine of the whole problem. And here's something very precise and very useful that the Buddha described about how these roots operate. Every time a sense object reaches us through one of the 6 sense doors, something we can see, hear, taste, smell, touch, or a thought that arises in the mind, the defilements present in that mind respond. And they do so at 3 distinct levels. The first and deepest level is anusaya, the latent tendencies. These are the defilements lying dormant in the mind, like seeds underground, not yet visible. Ajahn Thanissaro translates anusaya not as latent tendency, but as obsession, the quality of the mind that keeps returning to something, lying down with it again and again. At this level, the defilement hasn't done anything yet. It has simply been activated. The second level is pariyutthana, the stage where the defilement surges up into consciousness as unwholesome thoughts, emotions, and impulses. You feel the anger, the craving, the jealousy. It's active in the mind, but it has not yet spilled out into the world. The third level is vitikama, transgression. The defilement crosses from purely internal into action. Something is said or done that causes harm in the world. This 3-stage model is extraordinarily useful because it shows us exactly where intervention is possible. At the level of latent tendency, the work is done through wisdom and deep meditation, uprooting the seeds entirely. At the level of manifestation, the work is reflection, alertness, ardency, catching the surge before it becomes action. And at the level of transgression, the work is morality and restraint, the precepts, which we will talk about in the next video, actually. Now apply this to the person we've been talking about, the one whose karmic seeds were difficult and whose childhood watered the wrong ones. At every stage, something could have intervened, but if nothing did, if the latent tendencies went unaddressed, if the surges of anger or craving were repeatedly acted upon, if no moral framework was ever offered or modeled, then the path from seed to action becomes faster and faster, more and more automatic. The groove becomes a rut, the rut becomes a motorway, and what started as a tendency becomes a character. I'm going to make a full video about karma because it's genuinely fascinating and far more complex than most people realize. But let me touch on it briefly here because it's directly relevant. Karma means action. It's a natural law, not a judge sitting on a throne handing out punishments and rewards, but something more like the law of cause and effect applied to the mind and its intentions. You plant a chili seed, you get a chili plant. You plant cruelty, sustained and unexamined, and something grows from that too. When the Buddha was teaching, there was already an existing idea of karma, a fatalistic version common to several Indian schools of his time, which suggested that you were essentially a puppet of your past actions. What happened to you was your karma, your fate was set. There wasn't much you could do about it. Ajahn Thanisaro is very clear that this is precisely the misunderstanding the Buddha argued against. Buddhist karma, he explains, is non-linear. It operates in feedback loops, with the present moment shaped by both past and present actions simultaneously. Other Indian schools saw karma as a simple straight line. Past actions determine present, present actions determine future, with little room for genuine free will. The Buddha rejected this entirely. Present actions need not be determined by past ones. There is always room for new input. There's always agency, even if its range is somewhat shaped by what has come before. This is why a person born into terrible circumstances, carrying difficult karmic seeds from previous lives, watered further by a damaging childhood, is not simply condemned. The hand they were dealt may be very hard, but what they do with it moment by moment is still theirs to decide. The now is extraordinarily important in Buddhism because how you act now is what determines what comes next. What you water now is what will grow. This brings us to a question that really matters. If karma is a natural justice system, does that mean victims deserved what happened to them? No. Clearly, unambiguously, no. And the Buddha was explicit about this. He directly rejected the view that everything a person experiences is the result of past karma. He listed causes of suffering and painful experience, of which karma is only one. The others include physical imbalances in the body, seasonal changes, poor care of the body, and assault or harsh treatment. Not everything that happens to you was determined by your past actions. Other causal factors are always at work simultaneously. A child born into abuse did not deserve that. An innocent person harmed by someone else's violence did not earn it. The perpetrator carries the karma of the act. The victim is tragically, heartbreakingly drawn into the karmic field of someone else's choices. That is a terrible thing. It calls for compassion and not for a ledger of deserving. And here's something worth sitting with, especially if you or someone you know has been genuinely harmed by another person and is looking for some sense of justice in all of this. Karma does not operate only within a single lifetime. The Buddha was clear that unwholesome actions bear fruit, not always immediately, not always visibly, but they will bear fruit across this life and into future ones. The perpetrator's mind, shaped and hardened by its own actions, continues in the direction those actions have set, if no intervention happens. And the Buddha describes where that direction leads in very sober terms, and it is not a comfortable destination. The perpetrator is not getting away with anything. Even now, even in this moment, a mind capable of causing serious harm to others is not a free mind. It's not a happy mind. It's a mind in profound suffering of its own making, restless, agitated, driven by cravings and aversions it cannot control, heading somewhere it would not choose if it could see clearly. The karma is already operating. The fruit is already growing. It simply may not be visible from where we are standing right now. Before we go further, I want to say something about mettā, because it comes up here and I think the most common translation isn't very helpful. Mettā is one of the 4 Brahma Viharas, the good qualities of the mind that the Buddha considered foundational to developing the path. Mettā is usually translated as loving kindness. And a lot of people, quite reasonably, do not like this, because the instruction to feel loving kindness towards someone who's genuinely harmed you or harmed someone you love sounds not only impossible, but almost offensive, like you're being asked to pretend something you don't feel or to minimize what was done. Mettā does not mean that. A better translation is goodwill. Goodwill does not mean love. It does not mean approval. It does not mean you have to interact with this person, like them, forgive them on demand, or hold hands and sing. It means something much more basic and much more achievable. You wish for them to find ease. You wish for them to understand the causes of genuine happiness, which, as we've discussed, are not power and domination and the satisfaction of every craving, but the development of a calmer, kinder, more spacious mind. Because if they actually found that, if they genuinely understood it, they would stop causing harm to others and to themselves. You can have goodwill for someone you genuinely, deeply dislike. You can wish from a safe distance, with no obligation to interact, may you calm down. May you find a way out of the mess your mind is in. May you stop causing harm. That is mettā, and no one can take it from you. Only you can give or throw it away. One more thing worth saying, because it matters: conviction does not make something good either. Conviction is this thing where people go, oh yes, that must mean it's good. No, people who blow themselves up are utterly convinced they're doing something magnificent. History is full of atrocities committed by people who were completely certain they were right. The road to hell in the Buddhist picture is not paved with good intentions. It's paved with bad intentions that were never examined, or with good intentions attached to completely deluded views about what the actual consequences of actions would be. This is why the Buddha placed such emphasis on wisdom alongside goodness. It's not enough to mean well. You have to look clearly at what you're actually doing and what it is actually causing. Are you examining your intentions honestly? Not just at the end, but as you go along? Are you checking for harm? And are you willing to stop and turn around if the evidence says you should? This takes skill and wisdom, but not intellect and not education. What the path requires is not learning, bookishness, scholarship. It's honesty, willingness to look, and the courage to change direction when you see clearly that you need to. Zoom out for a moment. Look at the world. Every movement, every conflict, every backlash, there's a cause, there's a reason. It didn't emerge from nowhere. People feel threatened, people feel unseen, unheard, humiliated, and then they react, and the reactions collide, and the collisions cause more damage, which causes more reaction. This is dependent origination playing out on a civilizational scale. Causes and conditions all the way down. This does not mean everything is equivalent or that there are no genuine victims or perpetrators. It means that if we only ever react, if we only ever identify our tribe as good and theirs as evil, and pour our energy into that story, we are feeding the same mechanism that created the problem. The mind that loves to define itself against something, that gets a small dopamine hit from tribal righteousness, that sorts the world into us and them, that is also a form of clinging to self. A subtle one, but real. And Buddhism says, look at yourself, not exclusively, not to the exclusion of standing against genuine harm, but primarily. What are you cultivating in your mind? What are you watering? Because the aggregate of individual minds is the world. The more of us who find a way to calmer, clearer, more spacious ways of being, the less fuel there is for all of this. So to conclude, why do bad people exist? Because of causes and conditions. Because minds arrive already carrying the seeds of many lifetimes, and those seeds then get watered or not by what they encounter in this life. Because greed, aversion, and delusion are built into the human mind, not as destiny, but as potential. Potential that, if unchecked and unexamined, can go very dark, very fast. Because no one is born evil, but minds can travel a very long way in that direction, given the right or wrong conditions. And once the inversion sets in, once the values flip, it becomes very hard to help find the way back. And because we live in a realm, this desire realm we've been talking about, that is specifically structured around the constant feeding of craving. That is the water these seeds grow in. I find it genuinely hard to feel compassion for people who do the kinds of things that upset my friend and so many of us so much. I want to be honest about that. I have 2 small children, and there are things I know about my own capacity for rage if anything ever happened to them. I'm not speaking from a position of having it all figured out. But I believe, and I really do believe, that the Buddhist framework offers something that judgment alone cannot. It's an explanation that doesn't require the existence of pure evil and that sees the mechanism clearly, that points to where intervention is possible and that keeps the door open even for the most damaged minds. Not because they deserve our softness, but because closing that door does something to our own minds that we might not want to look at so closely, and to our society. So maybe a good thought to leave you with after all of this is that virtue is yours to keep and only you can give it away. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it interesting. As usual, please subscribe, like, comment. I would love to hear from you, and I will see you next time. Take care.